6. The company slowed as they passed beneath a towering arch of stone. As dark as the start of a nightmare, night had fallen when they came to a stop. Candles shone from the windows of a great house, but the yard was lit only by the silver of the moon that escaped the clouds. Grayling stood and pressed her face against the branches that served as the bars of their cage. She could see little in the moonlight, but she could hear the bustle of their arrival. Horses clopped and whinnied and huffed. Footsteps rang on stone or squelched in mud. Soldiers called back and forth to each other, and no one paid attention to the prisoners. Thus ends the first day of our trek together, thought Grayling, captured and caged like dancing bears. If only Desdemona Cork had not left them, she could have enchanted the soldiers, perhaps even the man with the metal nose. If such could be enchanted, the captives would likely be in a fine house right now, supping on partridge and elderberry wine, instead of in a cage in the cold with their bellies woefully empty. Then there was a silence until a man's voice said, "You stay here and guard them." "Why me? Be you afeard of them witches?" another voice asked. Scuffle, scuffle, Grayling heard, and then there was quiet again except for the snuffling and spitting out of the man who had lost the scuffle. Old Nancy moved to Grayling's side. "I found a bit of spider web for your cheeks," she whispered. She clucked in concern as she gently applied the web to Grayling's cut with her warm hand. "You," said a voice both cold and stony. "You witches, I have use for your magic." "We," said old Nancy with an impatient sigh, "are not that kind of witch." The voice came closer, and so did the speaker, the warlord with the nose of metal. He thrust his face against the branches of their cage and shouted, "I need witch magic. But for you three I find no witch, no magician, no wizard abroad in the land." "Aye, we know," said old Nancy. "'Twas an evil force took them, and we think we can set it to rights if you would but free us." "Free you? Nay, I need gold. And I need more armed men. You will use your spells, your curses, your powers, whatever you possess, to see that I get them." A tiny ray of moonlight shimmered off the tip of his nose, and Grayling shuddered. "I need the Earl of Whetstone soldiers to return and run. And the Earl himself I wish gone. Whether he dies or leaves the kingdom or just whoosh disappears, it is up to you, but I want him gone." He slowly paced the breadth of the cage and back, his steps echoing through the courtyard like funeral drums. "I want a cloak of invisibility, a binding spell, and an assortment of poisons that act quickly and surely." Old Nancy stamped her foot. "You do not listen. We do not have such powers and cannot—" The man slammed his hand against the branches of their prison. "You will do as I tell you, or you will remain caged like monkeys until the flesh falls off your bones." He stalked off, shouting over his shoulder, "You will have no food nor drink until I get what I want, and if you remain stubborn, I will have you disemboweled one by one." There was a short silence, and then, "I'm frightened," Pansy said with a snuffle, "and terribly hungry. What do we do now?" "At the moment there is nothing to do," said old Nancy. "We are at that man's mercy. Many maggots build nests in his hair." Grayling considered their situation. Likely her mother would know what to do, or rather what to tell Grayling to do, but her mother was part way to being a tree, roots and rutabagas. Grayling herself would have to think of something. In frustration she shook the sides of the cage. "Grey Eyes," said a voice from above, a raven that landed on the roof of the cage. "Grey Eyes," it repeated, "this Pook is with you. Is there aught he can do?" With a cronk and a shaking of his feathers, the raven became a mouse again. He fell through the bars of the cage and landed with a tiny oof at old Nancy's feet. Old Nancy studied him. "Can you not change into something useful, a strong knife mayhap, or a torch, or a joint of beef?" asked Pansy. Ignoring them both, Pook asked again, "Grey Eyes, is there aught that this Pook can do for you?" "Certes," said Grayling, wiping her eyes on her sleeve, "I wish to be gone from here. How will you make that happen?" After a moment of silence, the mouse said, "There are two things this Pook might do. One, turn himself into a mad bull and tear down this cage. Two, this mouse can remain mouse and chew through it." "Oh, Pook, you can help me. Which will you do?" More silence. "This mouse is compelled to tell the truth. He does in fact know how to change into a mad bull, so he shall immediately commence chewing. A hole large enough for you to climb through should take—" The moon reflected in the mouse's tiny eyes as they shifted this way and that around the cage. "A month or so." "A month, a mousey, a month! 'Twill not do. We will be long dead ere a month has passed." Grayling slumped against the cage. "Nay, mistress, do not respond," said the mouse. "Trust this mouse and wait here." And he skidded away. Grayling smiled through her tears. "Wait here? Where else?" And the three sat together on one side of the cage. Grayling huddled against the warmth that was old Nancy, comforted by the familiar aroma of sweat and smoke and sausages. The others dozed, but Grayling, plagued with visions of disemboweling, could not rest. Some time had passed when she heard a sound, the sound of the wind stripping the grain of a wheat field, or a thousand tailors scissoring cloth, or an army of mice chewing through hazel branches. Chif, chif, chif. Chif, chif, chif. She peered through the darkness. Indeed, mice were beyond counting, were at the other side of the cage, tumbling over each other, gnawing and tearing their way through the branches that served as bars. The noise grew louder as their numbers grew. Chip, 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 chip. Old Nancy woke and addressed the scene. "'Tis well done, Mouse," she said, "but let us make some noise down out the chest chewing, lest the guard hear." Pansy yawned and said, "Can you not call thunder and lightning?" Old Nancy shook her head. "Nay, nothing would bring attention to us or illuminate what is happening. Nay, my mother," said Grayling, "has a song with chip-chips that she sings as she slashes chai blossoms with their stems. We can sing it loudly." The mice chewed on. "Chip, chip, 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 chip." "What be that sound?" called the guard. "What are you doing in there?" "We," Grayling said, "are but singing a song with much chip, 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 chipping." "Chip, chip, chip, chip," sang Old Nancy. She knocked Pansy with her elbow, and the girl shouted, "Chip, chip!" "I do like a song," said the guard. "Sing so I can hear." So Grayling sang, "Do not go to the field, my girl, today. 'Tis August and the men are cutting hay. Chip, 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 chip. Go silvery scythes, harvest is under way, and I wish you would not go to the field today. Chip, 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 chip. Chip, 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 chip." The mice went chip, 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 and Old Nancy Pansy sang chip, 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 chip. But Grayling was silent a moment as she remembered Hannah Strong singing while she snipped the greens in the garden. The sun had lit streaks of bronze in her hair and roses in her cheeks, and her fingers were swift and supple. "You witches be fine singers," their guard called out. "I vow I can hear the sound with the scythes cutting the hay." Grayling sang louder as she continued her song, and the mice continued their chip-chips. Her own true love was in the field that day. His hair was gold, and his eyes were moonlit gray. Chip-chip, chip-chip, with silvery scythe he swung, but swung astray. He cleaved her head, and it lay in the field of hay. Chip-chip, 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 chip-chip. Chip-chip, chip-chip, shouted Old Nancy, and swish, 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 cried Pansy, her face red with excitement, and slash, slash. The listening soldier was so stirred that he had begun to chip-chip along. "Finish the song," he called. "What follows? How fares the girl?" "Poorly," said Grayling, "for she be headless and dead." "Dead, nay, that be a poor story, and not worth listening," the guard said, with a most unacceptable ending. He crossed his arms, and with a huff and a bah walked away. "Not all endings are happy," said Grayling, and she sang on. There were other sounds in the darkness, shouts and cries, the calls of soldiers striding through the yard, the grim and doomful echo of their boots. Ere long the night grew quiet but for the chip-chip of the mouse. More songs were needed, but Old Nancy and Pansy slumbered in a corner. "Can you not hurry?" Grayling whispered, but to whom? The cold of the midnight settled upon her, and she pulled her cloak tighter. She sang her mother's healing song and a love chant and a song to cheer, although it did not cheer her. She even sang to the grimoire, but there was no answering song. Face spots and flea bites. Had the song lost its magic? Grayling caught her breath and then remembered a bridge. They had crossed a bridge. Water stood between her and the grimoire. She hoped it was no more than that. After a time the mouse hole had grown large enough for a person to pass through. "This done," Grayling whispered as she woke Pansy and Old Nancy. "And Pook, where was Pook?" She could not leave without him, but the mice were so many, crawling and climbing over each other. Gray mice, brown mice, fat mice, and thin. How would she ever find one special mouse? "Pook," she whispered, "Pook, come hither to me." But there was no response, no Pook with his pink nose and pink ears and more whiskers than any mouse truly needed. "We must go," said Old Nancy, "not without Pook." "Who?" "Pook, the mouse, the raven, the goat." Old Nancy shook her head. Grayling could not see it in the dark, but she knew from the tisk sound Old Nancy made. "He is a resourceful bird, mouse, whatever he is, and likely he will find you." They had to leave. Pook was resourceful indeed. Grayling took some comfort in that fact, but still her heart felt empty and sore. She climbed out of the cage behind Pansy and Old Nancy, making what haste they could. They fought their way through a hedgerow, thick with thorns and thistles, and scratched their faces and snagged their hair. "Thistles and thorns, begone, begone!" Grayling shouted, as she yanked the skirt of her kirtle from the thorn's grip, leaving a long gash in the skirt. They crashed through bushes and brush to a path heading steeply down. With a sharp cry, Pansy fell, twisting her ankle beneath her. She pulled on Old Nancy's skirts and almost toppled her, too. "Clumsy girl," Old Nancy hissed. "Can you do nothing right?" Pansy felt the sting of Old Nancy's bad temper more often than the rest of them, Grayling thought, but then she earned it more often. "Come," said Grayling to the girl. "Lean on me. I am strong enough for the both of us." Pansy did, and like a two-headed beast they scuttled away. 7. A heavy mist obscured the rising sun and darkened the path. Old Nancy lifted her broom. "I shall banish the mist and let in the morning light." "Would that not make it easier for us to be followed when our escape is discovered?" asked Grayling. She sighed with a sigh that ruffled a hair on Pansy's head. at all unwilling, offered a solution. I am accustomed to finding my way in the mist in my valley. I could, I expect, lead, and you follow. Grumbling, she took Pansy's arm and Old Nancy's hand, and they crept carefully through the mist down the steep and slippery path. Grayling knew 3 kinds of mist: gentle mist that wrapped around her like a fine lady's veil, mist thick with drops of moisture like peas in a soup, and a dense mist full of secrets and dangers and foreboding. This mist was neither gentle nor soupy, but menacing and somehow sinister. After a time she heard the muffled sounds of horses close behind them, and then the marching feet of soldiers. She pulled Old Nancy and Pansy off the path, just as a voice she recognized as the metal-nosed warlord shouted, "Find them! Do not come back without them, lest the disemboweling be yours!" Grayling broke off a stout elder branch and gave it to Pansy for a walking stick. Off the path it would be harder to walk and slower going, but safer. The 3 crouched low and crept away. They skittered and stumbled as the terrain descended more sharply. Grayling suddenly lurched sideways and fell to her knees, or rather one knee, for her other leg was hanging over the edge of a steep drop into the unknown. Her heart was pounding like a rabbit's. The world was full of dangers, and she was leading others through it. She was watching over them, but who was watching over her? What if she made a mistake? Finally she rose to her feet, and with a brisk shake of her head, continued on down, and the others followed. As they circled past the outskirts of a town, there came the noise of conflict. Metal sounded on metal, on earth, on wood. "I expect," said Grayling, "that the soldiers have encountered edge-dwellers." She, Old Nancy, and Pansy moved farther off the road. The ground turned boggy, and Grayling's shoe squelched a soggy sort of tune. Squish, squelch, squish, squelch. Ahead was a small grove of trees, saplings, not much taller than she. Their trunks were slender and green, supple and strong, but Grayling gulped. Trees, but yet men. Trees just below their eyes, and men above. Their arms, lifted as in supplication, were newly leafed out, although it was autumn's, and their fingertips waved in distress. With soft moans and sighs, the rustling leaves murmured as if calling for help. Fear suffused the air like a bad smell. Grayling felt her head spin with panic and revulsion. She turned away and hurried off, whispering, "Sorry, sorry, sorry," for she was useless and as helpless as they were. Old Nancy and Pansy, picking their way over the marshy ground, noticed nothing. A slippery bank led down to a rocky, fast-growing stream. Here was the water that stood between Grayling and the grimoire. They would have to cross it. Pansy, limping and stumbling in the rear, sneezed a great, noisy sneeze. "Husht," said Grayling over her shoulder. Pansy wheezed. "Husht," said Old Nancy over her shoulder. Pansy gurgled. Grayling and Old Nancy turned to look at her. Fee! Someone was out there. Someone taller than Pansy and bulkier. Someone in an iron helmet. Someone with his arm right across Pansy's throat and a sword in his hand. "You will do as I say, or this wench will find her head separated from her body," the soldier said. "'Tis an odsome thing. They all be looking for you, and I, who wanted only to run off, stumble across you. Good fortune for me, as Lord Mandrake has promised a reward." He pushed Pansy to the ground. She whimpered as she fell on her injured leg, and her eyes and her nose ran. "Sit and be still," he said to all of them. "We will wait here until those edge-dwelling brutes are routed or destroyed." They sat. Pansy had his side and the sword at the ready. The mist was heavier here near the water, the air dank and rank with the smell of rotting vegetation, and the ground mucky and cold. Grayling wriggled until she was as comfortable as she was likely to get. The soldier stretched out his legs. "Make a fire," he commanded. "This blasted damp creeps into my very bones." He removed his helmet and scratched his head. Old Nancy pulled a tinder box from her pocket and removed the flint and the steel striker. She rose and gathered together small twigs and dried leaves, stuck the striker against the flint again and again, and blew on the sparks. Soon there was a tiny fire, which Grayling fed with fallen branches, and the two sat again. Grayling watched the fire flicker. What could be done to free Pansy? Free all of them? "I've been pondering what to do about this lout," she muttered softly to Old Nancy. "Might you call lightning down upon him and toast him to a cinder?" "Aye, I might," Old Nancy said, "but I might miss and toast you or Pansy, fire or tree or nothing at all." "You have seen how imperfect are my skills with lightning." He would be altered and likely angry. Grayling wiggled her feet as she thought. Could she do something? She knew about straining beer and spinning wool, finding firewood and gathering herbs. Herbs! Certain herbs were known to cause deep sleep. Was there sleepy nightshade or valerian nearby? She looked about her by the light of the fire, but saw none. There were mint, watercress, water parsley, and climbing into the trees the thorny white bryony vine. "Beware the white bryony," her mother often said. "The berries could kill, and just a bit of the root would empty your belly and void your bowels." Grayling thought until she had a plan, which she told to Old Nancy in a hiss and a whisper. "What does Lord Mandrake want with your wenches?" The soldier asked. The firelight played on his features, illuminating small dark eyes and a face marked with wounds and old and new. Grayling took a deep breath and said, "We are powerful witches. We of all witches in the world possess the secret invincibility, and he wants it. Nay, said the soldier. He picked a sore on his chin. You are but an old woman and 2 girls. Tell me the truth. Grayling caught Old Nancy's eye across the fire and nodded. Old Nancy nodded back. She rocked and murmured, crooned, and shook her broom. A sharp crack of thunder shook the ground. The soldier jumped to his feet. Fie upon it, he shouted. You are witches. He sat and grabbed Pansy again. Invincibility, you said. What means invincibility? We have a potion that will make him powerful, immortal, and infinitely wise, Grayling said. The soldier spat. Nonsense. Then why are you not invincible? Grayling shook her head. The potion does not work on witches, but 1 sip of our secret brew. Make it for me. Nay, 'tis too potent, and special to give just anyone. Pansy gurgled again, as the soldier's arm wrapped once more around her neck. I am not just anyone, he said. Do it. Let her go, Grayling said. I would brew a draught for you, but I have no pot. He loosened his hold on Pansy, and kicked his iron helmet over to Grayling. Now you do. Trying not to smile, Grayling stood. She filled the helmet from the stream and placed it in the embers of the fire. She picked the herbs she needed, mint for its flavor and the gray, fleshy root of the white bryony for its power, and added them to the water when it boiled. The soldier reached for it. Nay, said Grayling, stopping his hand. It must steep and cool a bit. They sat in silence. Grayling chewed on a fingernail. If this does not work, if his belly is out of sorts and that be all, we might wish we were back in the cage. Now, said the soldier. He reached for the helmet and slipped slowly. Feh, 'tis foul. Invincibility is not easily won, Grayling said. Drink it all. Pansy, come and sit here while the brew does its work. There was quiet again, disturbed only by the sound of fighting some ways off. Old Nancy, Pansy, and Grayling huddled together while the soldier nodded sleepily. Suddenly he jumped to his feet with a mighty groan. Grayling could hear his innards rumbling with like thunder. You, he shouted as he lunged at her, but he was interrupted by the noisy spewing forth of the contents of his belly and his bowels. Run, Grayling shouted. The 3 raced along the stream, which ran stronger and faster as it flowed downhill. Grayling slipped in boggy patches, stumbled over tree roots, snagged her skirts on thorny bushes. Tangles and toadstones, she muttered over and over. A rickety bridge, made of reeds stung between lengths of rope, crossed over the stream. The span swayed, although no breeze stirred, and pieces of dried reed were sloughing out into the water. Grayling studied the bridge, the stream, the terrain, and shook her head. We must cross to the other side to discover the grimoire song again, and return to the road west, she said, but I misdoubt this creaky bridge can hold us. She threw some rocks onto the bridge to test for sturdiness and poked it with a tree branch. It shed more reeds but held. Pansy shoved her aside. Such dilly-dally, bands of ruffians could be close after us. Let me by. She took a careful step onto the bridge, then another. It crackled and swayed but held. Another step, another step. She looked back, grinned, and called, "'Tis sturdy enough," and with that the bridge crumpled and dumped her in the water. Figs and fennel seeds, Grayling muttered. This Pansy be more troublous than a stew-pot full of snakes. Taking Old Nancy's broom, she scrambled down the bank to the stream. She waded in near her knees and stretched the broom out to Pansy, who was floundering in the water, but instead of pulling Pansy out, Grayling found herself pulled in. She bounced and tumbled in the fast-running stream, while Old Nancy scrambled alongside, calling, come back now! I would if I could, you foolish old woman, thought Grayling. After I pushed Pansy to the very bottom, holding tight to Old Nancy's broom, Grayling bumped on the rocks, scraped on boulders, and tangled with tree branches as she swept downstream. Swallowed water spewed from her mouth and her nose, sodden skirts and snarled legs, as she was thrown hither and thither through the surging stream. A tangle of branches ahead promised a handhold. Gulping and spitting, Grayling stretched to reach it, but the current spun her into a jumble of rocks. She knocked her head on the rocks again and again, and felt dizzy with the pain, but finally, stone by stone, she dragged herself toward the bank, while the churning water tried to pull her back. Finally, she struggled out of the water and lay panting, lungs heaving, still clutching Old Nancy's broom. She was on the far side of the stream. Across the raging water, Pansy, who had also hauled herself out, stood with Old Nancy, on the other side, the wrong side. A plague on them both, thought Grayling. Let them stay there. I will go elsewhere, anywhere. She was weary with leading and deciding, with child minding, an old woman tending. She would find some other way to rescue her mother. She wrung what water she could from her cloak and her kirtle. Cursing and grumbling, she climbed up the bank toward the woods, but slipped on the slippery soil, and stumbled into an old oak. Its bark pitted and thick, and its branches gnarled. She could almost make out a face, its eyes closed in a gnarl of bark like an open mouth. 'Twas not a tree, but a man. His final screams hardened into bark. And beside him a sapling, a woman, hair fluttering with every breeze, tree up to her terrified eyes, unable to make a sound. Filled with pity and horror, shaking with cold and wet with fear, Grayling stood there. The evil force had been here and was gone. Grayling was alone in what had been cunning folks, rooted to the ground, their limbs and hearts and brains. Trapped inside trees, bark, and branches, nearly to the top of their heads, she could feel their terror and confusion, And this was all true of the kingdom. Mages and wise women, people with skills and power, now wretched and defenseless. This undertaking, she realized, was not just a matter of freeing Hannah Strong, but of freeing them all. And the only rescuers at hand were Auld, Nancy, Pansy, and Grayling herself. She shook her head. She would not run. They might not win this fight, but she would not run. She pushed her wet hair out of her face. Her first task was to sing to the grimoire and pray that now that she was on this side of the stream, it could hear her and sing back. And indeed it did. Her heart leapt. She slid back down the bank and waved to Auld Nancy. "Come back, Grayling," Auld Nancy called. "Nay, you must cross this side of the river." Water. Shouting back and forth across the stream, they walked along the banks on both sides until they found a spot where the water ran less deep. A fallen tree lay halfway across. "Hold on to the tree and cross," said Grayling. "Pansy, you help Auld Nancy." Pansy shook her head, and her wet hair flew about her. "I will not go back into the water. Watch me," said Auld Nancy. "It will be easy." She waded into the water and grabbed for the tree. Hand over hand, she pulled herself along, her skirt swirling about her. Finally, she was near enough so that Grayling could wade out and take her hand. The water came to their knees, and the strong current pulled them about. Auld Nancy fell, and her hand was torn from Grayling's. For a moment Grayling thought the old woman would be swept downstream. She grabbed Auld Nancy by her skirt and held on. Together they staggered for the water and onto the bank, where they lay, breathing heavily and coughing up water. "What about me?" Pansy called. "Do as I did," Auld Nancy called back. "All but the falling. I cannot, I am afeard." Muttering "Fee, fee, fee," Grayling took her wet coat off. She forced herself back into the water and paddled and pulled Pansy, mewling and whining, across. Grayling wrung her skirt in her hair and emptied out her sodden shoes, while Pansy wiped mud from her face with the hem of her kirtle. "You pig-headed, beef-witted, naughty poop," Grayling said. "This was all your doing. I should have just left you in the water at the beginning." "Do not waste breath, Grayling," said Auld Nancy. "Her mother did say Pansy was foolish." The old woman picked up her soggy broom. "Though it would be better for all of us, Pansy, if you were less so." Pansy tossed out her chin and narrowed her eyes, but did not argue with Auld Nancy. The old woman removed her wet cloak and shook it. Out fell a fish, which lay flapping on the ground. "Ooh," Pansy said, "make a fire and we shall eat." "No fire," said Grayling. She took the fish by the tail and tossed it back into the water. "We will still be pursued by half the ruffians in the kingdom. Let us move on." Damp and dripping, the tree turned away from the stream and followed a path up to where it met the road. Grayling could hear no sounds of fighting. She hoped the edge-dwellers had been driven off with the soldiers giving chase. A sudden wind rose with a bite and a howl. It drove away the remains of the mist and swirled around three travelers, clawing at their faces and tangling their skirts. Grayling's hair danced and her eyes watered. Wet and clammy though she was, she shivered less from the cold than from the sudden feelings of dread, foreboding, and a terrible hopelessness. Then, as abruptly as it had appeared, the wind subsided, the darkness lightened, and Grayling's spirit rose. She grimaced. What kind of wind brings such darkling and despair? Shaking her head to clear it, she took Auld Nancy by the arm and continued on, Pansy panting and lagging behind. "Where might Desdemona Cork be?" Grayling asked Auld Nancy after a time. "Will she find us again, or has she left us to continue without her?" "When shall we rest?" asked Pansy. "I am fair spent, and when shall we eat?" No one had answers. The way seemed to Grayling much longer afoot than it had been back of the caged wagon, but at least they were not captives. "8. At last they reached the road west once more. There the setting sun illuminated a fantastical pavilion of marigold silk that flapped and fluttered in the breeze, making waves of golden cloth. At one side were a coach, panelled in green leather with brass fittings and scarlet window curtains, and a coachman asleep on the seat. Before the pavilion stood a man, a very rich man, Grayling guessed, as she studied his velvet jacket, snow-white breeches, and high-heeled black leather boots. He stood motionless, like a statue, like someone under a spell. A spell! Had the evil force been here? She took Auld Nancy and Pansy each by a hand, ready to flee. Then from the pavilion came the aroma of roasting meat, and apple blossoms out of season and unexpected, so all the more sweet, and lavender, mint, and rich honey. Of course, Desdemona Cork! Grayling breathed out with relief. Desdemona Cork! The lovely woman parted the silks and beckoned them in. Awestruck, Grayling looked about her. Draperies of crimson and indigo damask they were, and lavishly cushioned couches, beeswax candles, and flaming torches, and small fires and bronze and braziers warming the air, while Grayling stood as astounded Pansy hobbled in with a great sigh, flopped onto a couch of ruby velvet. Old Nancy, however, stopped at the entrance. "How come you will buy all this luxury?" she asked, frowning at Desdemona Court. "You cannot be trusted, enchantress that you are. Who has given you all this trap us?" "Muzzle your tongue, grouching old crony," said Desdemona Court. "The mayor of this town found himself besotted with me, and furnished all you see. You and your ill temper are welcome to share it or not, as you choose." Old Nancy, bent with fatigue, shuffled in and dropped onto a cushion far from Desdemona Court. Urged by old Nancy, Grayling, who still stood at the entry, related the story of their capture and escape. Pansy interrupted, saying, "Old Nancy thinks Grayling was brave and a great help to us, which I could have been also if I had wanted. But Grayling likes telling us what to do, so I let her do it." She snuffled loudly as she removed her boots and wiggled her dirty, blistered feet. They all turned to look at Grayling. She blinked. Pansy had nearly gotten herself into Grayling drowned. Twice Pansy whined and grumbled and complained at every turn. And she thought she could be brave and helpful? Grayling gritted her teeth. She had not wanted to leave, but who else was there? "That is all over, and we have survived. Now I believe we must hurry away before we are discovered," she said reluctantly, because of the warmth, the soft cushions, the aroma of the roast meat, and the still missing Pook. Old Nancy, her face weariful and wan, said, "Desdemona Court, be useful. Use your wiles to delay our pursuers for a time." Long enough for us to eat and rest. Desdemona Court looked confused, as if the idea of being useful confounded her, but she nodded slowly. "You will be safe here until dawn. I can make it so." So Grayling, too, sat, choosing a cushion the green of fiddle-headed ferns in her valley. Suddenly, from outside the pavilion became the sounds of men shouting, and the clanging of weapons, and the snorting of horses. "The soldiers!" Grayling jumped to her feet, her hunger gone. Desdemona Court stepped outside, and Grayling could smell the roses. She moved closer to the entry and heard snatches of conversation. "Have you seen the Whither the Witches? And south, due south, and a coach with 4 horses running fast." At a sudden shrieking, Grayling pulled back the silks and peered out. One of the soldiers was thrashing about, shouting and tugging at his clothes. Was he in the midst of a fit, possessed of a demon? Out from a sleeve fell not a demon but a toad, brown and warty. Desdemona Court squealed as it crawled over her foot and into the tent. "Grey Eyes, this mouse has found you," said the toad to Grayling. Grayling's chest swelled with joy. "Pook, 'tis really you?" Although she much preferred Pook as a mouse, or a raven, or even a goat, she lifted Pook the toad and patted him gently on his bumpy back. "You truly are a remarkable creature to have found me," she said. "I could not have walked such a far way, so this soldier carried me," said Pook the toad, though he was unaware of his assistance. "By my reckoning, you now have saved me twice," Grayling said, bowing her head. "My most grateful thanks to you and your mouse accomplices. Nay, the mice did what mice do, chew. 'Twas great fun for a mouse." Pook quivered, and Grayling, disinclined to put a toad in her pocket, held him gingerly on her palm. After a few moments, the shawl twitching and veil fluttering by Desdemona Court, the shoulders bowing and scraping, left, heading south as she had instructed him. The man of the high-heeled black leather boots still stood unmoving and unaware. Grayling gestured questioningly toward him. "I grew tired of his attention," said Desdemona Court with a shrug. Inside the pavilion, Desdemona Court handed something to Grayling. It was her basket, left behind when the 3 were captured. She put Pook inside, where in true toad fashion he hid himself beneath the few remaining herbs, now limp and brown, but welcome cover for a toad. Grayling kicked off her soggy shoes, curled herself into a soft cushion, and ate her fill of beef and apples and bread with honey. What a day she had had! Would she survive another like it? She combed her still damp hair with her fingers, and pulled it into a braid, and then fell into a deep and dream-free sleep. Dawn's sun, shining through the silk, brightened the pavilion. The mist was gone. The travelers woke, comfortably rested and full of roast meat. "Now we must go," Grayling said. "I will sing to the grimoire, and we can follow." Pansy stuck her blistered feet toward Grayling. "See you these? And my ankle is not yet mended. Can we not linger for a day or more?" "And I," said Desdemona Court. "I am weary." "Weary!" shouted old Nancy. "You weary? I spent a night in a cage, crossed a river, and walked until my feet near fell off, and you think you are weary." "Me nearly drowned twice," said Pansy. Old Nancy shouted, "You are young and hardy. I am old and my—" "Enough," said Grayling with surprising firmness. "I have seen such things as will haunt my dreams for years. Weary or no, I will go on, with you or alone. If there is a way to free all those who are rooted, I will find it. You do as you wish." She stood and wrapped her damp cloak, redolent with the stench of wet wool, about her. "Fia, Fia, you are the most boasting and prideful today," said Pansy. "Hush, Pansy," said old Nancy, climbing to her feet. "Of course I will go on, we will all go on." She crossed her arms and stared at Pansy and Desdemona Court. Pansy said, "I would not be left here alone." She frowned and pulled on her shoes. Desdemona Court huffed a lock of hair out of her face and reluctantly nodded. The company, now 4 once again, stepped outside. The morning sky was blue and gold in the soft violet of the woodland flowers. Grayling breathed deeply. "As we continue west," said Desdemona Court, We shall not encounter the soldiers, for I sent them elsewhere." She gestured toward the outside of the pavilion, and the man standing there. "Sir, whoever he is, will provide us with a coach and four. I will wake him." "Nay, such a splendid coach will attract unwelcome interest," sighed Grayling. "I would rather not meet the metal-nosed warlord or such like again. You, Desdemona Cork," said old Nancy as she waved her broom. "Think ever of yourself. Grayling has the right of it. The coach would be too conspicuous." "I say we take the coach for the sake of my poor feet," said Pansy. Grayling bit her lip in consternation before asking Desdemona Cork, "What would happen when the enchantment wore off and he found us in his coach?" Desdemona Cork frowned and sulked, and twirled her skirts and her scarves. "If we cannot ride, I would prefer you to return to the town and the mayor. You may go on without me." "Still I will take the coach," Pansy insisted. Old Nancy turned on her. "You will do that I bid you." "Fie upon this company," shouted Grayling. "Fie! I have had enough of the carping and scolding and bickering. Take the coach or do not take the coach. I am leaving." A sudden rumble of thunder shook the ground, followed by a flash of light. Grayling, Pansy, and Desdemona Cork all looked at old Nancy. "'Twarn't me," she said. More thunder was followed by a swirl of smoke and the sound of trumpets. Grayling grabbed old Nancy's hand. Smoke and shadow. Were they discovered? Were they now doomed to be rooted to the ground?